You belong in a cage, you filth! Odette Hale's scream shattered the heavy silence of the courtroom, her finger trembling as she pointed at the boy in the orange jumpsuit. "Order! I said order!" Judge Atticus Ravensworth bellowed, though a smirk played on his thin, cruel lips. He didn't bang the gavel to stop the abuse, he banged it to savor the echo. He leaned over the mahogany bench, his eyes dead and cold like shark glass. "Ms. Hale is rightfully distressed," Atticus sneered, locking eyes with the teenager. And looking at the defendant, one can hardly blame her for seeing a predator. The air in courtroom 3D was thick enough to choke on, a suffocating mixture of stale floor wax, nervous sweat, and the ancient, rotting scent of old paper. It was a humid Tuesday in July, and the air conditioning had rattled and died an hour ago, turning the wood-paneled room into a kiln. But for Judge Atticus Ravensworth, the heat was a weapon. It made defendants sweat. It made them desperate. It stripped away their composure layer by layer until only the raw, trembling nerve remained. Atticus sat high upon his bench, the elevated perch designed to make him look like a god looking down on insects. He adjusted his silk robe, irritated by the way it clung to his damp shirt, but he refused to show discomfort. He was the master of this domain. His family name, Ravensworth, was carved into the cornerstone of the courthouse foundation. He wasn't just a judge, he was an institution. Below him, the defendant sat in the heavy oak chair, looking absurdly small. Sylvan Ashbourne. The name on the docket was elegant, almost rhythmic, a stark contrast to the figure presenting it. Sylvan was 17, black, and dressed in a county-issue orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, hanging off his lean frame like a deflated balloon. His wrists were thin, bound by handcuffs that clicked softly whenever he shifted. Most boys in his position were shaking by now. They were crying for their mothers or acting out in a display of bravado that Atticus enjoyed crushing. But Sylvan was different. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural. His back was straight, not slouching. His eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on a point just above the judge's left shoulder, refusing to make direct contact, yet refusing to look at the floor. It infuriated Atticus. "Mr. Ashbourne," Atticus drawled, his voice a deep baritone that he loved to hear echo off the walls. "Do you understand the gravity of the charges before you? Grand larceny, assault. The theft of a diamond brooch valued at over $50,000 from the Hale estate." Atticus paused, letting the silence stretch. "That is a king's ransom for a boy from wherever it is you crawled out of." Sylvan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he remained silent. "Your Honor," Callista Drake interjected, rising from the defense table. She was young, sharp-featured, with a suit that had seen better days, but her eyes were fierce. She was a public defender who fought like she was paid $1 million an hour, a trait Atticus found tiresome. "My client understands the charges. He pleads not guilty, and we object to the characterization of his background. Sylvan is a scholarship student at—" "Overruled," Atticus snapped, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "Save the sob stories for sentencing, Ms. Drake. I've read the report. Foster homes, truancy. A scholarship means nothing if the nature is rotten." He looked back at Sylvan, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper that the court reporter still caught. "You see, boy, I know your type. You see something shiny, something that belongs to your betters, and your instinct takes over. It's biological, isn't it? The urge to take." A ripple of shock went through the gallery, but it was quickly stifled. This was Ravensworth's court. He said what he wanted. "I didn't steal anything," Sylvan said. His voice was quiet, calm, and possessed a diction that startled the judge. It wasn't the voice of the streets. It was the voice of a library. Atticus laughed, a dry, barking sound. "He speaks, and with such denial. Tell me, boy, if you didn't steal it, how did it end up in your backpack? Did the Diamond Fairy put it there?" "It was planted," Sylvan said, his gaze finally lowering to meet the judge's. There was no fear in those eyes, only a simmering, ancient anger. And I think you know that. Atticus's face turned a mottled shade of red. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall. He gripped his gavel, knuckles white. You will speak when spoken to, or I will have you gagged. Do you understand me? You are here because you are a criminal. You are here because you made the mistake of touching Odette Hale, a girl with a future, unlike you. In the front row of the gallery, Odette Hale sat surrounded by her parents. She was blonde, beautiful in a fragile porcelain way, and currently dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked like a victim. She looked like exactly the kind of girl Atticus Ravensworth had spent his life protecting from the encroachment of the chaotic elements. Beside Odette sat Gemma Barrett, the prosecutor. Gemma was ambitious, ruthless, and had her eyes on a judgeship. She knew the script. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed. We will prove that this individual not only stole the Hale family heirloom, but threatened Ms. Hale's life when she confronted him. Proceed, Ms. Barrett, Atticus said, leaning back, a cruel smile returning. Let's expose this charade for what it is. But as the opening statements began, Sylvan Ashbourne didn't look at the prosecutor. He turned his head slightly, looking toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. He was waiting for something, or someone. The heat in the courtroom seemed to rise in tandem with Judge Ravensworth's ego. The air was heavy, sticky, and smelled of prejudice. Gemma Barrett prowled in front of the jury box, holding the evidence bag aloft. Inside, the diamond brooch glittered under the fluorescent lights, a chaotic star trapped in plastic. This, Gemma announced, her voice theatrical, is the legacy of the Hale family, passed down for 4 generations, and this defendant, she whipped around, pointing a manicured finger at Sylvan, thought he could pawn it for sneakers and drugs. Objection! Callista Drake was on her feet instantly. Speculation. There is zero evidence linking my client to drug use or any intent to sell. Sustained on the drugs, Atticus mumbled, looking bored. But the intent to profit is obvious, Ms. Drake. Why else would he take it? To wear it to the prom? Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Atticus beamed. He loved playing to the crowd. Callista's face flushed, but she held her ground. Your Honor, I have a motion to dismiss based on the police report. The officer who searched Sylvan's bag did not have probable cause. Sylvan was simply walking home from the library. He was stopped because he looked suspicious in a wealthy neighborhood. Atticus sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation that rattled into the microphone. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Miss Drake, we are not going to waste the court's time with technicalities. The boy was in a neighborhood where he clearly didn't belong. That is cause enough in my book. The property values alone in Hale Manor demand vigilance. Being black in a high-income zip code is not a crime, Your Honor, Callista said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Atticus slammed the gavel down so hard the wood splintered slightly. Watch your tone, counselor. You are treading on thin ice. This isn't a civil rights rally. This is a court of law. The motion is denied. Sit down before I hold you in contempt. Sylvan reached out and gently touched Callista's arm. It was a gesture of surprising maturity. It's okay, he whispered. Let them talk. I can't let him treat you like this, Callista hissed back, shuffling her papers. He needs to, Sylvan replied enigmatically. The more he talks, the deeper he digs. Gemma called her first witness, Odette Hale. Odette took the stand with the grace of a trained dancer. She swore on the Bible, her voice a breathless whisper. When asked to recount the events, she turned on the waterworks. I was just walking to my car, Odette sniffled, looking helplessly at the jury. I had the brooch in my purse because I was taking it to the jeweler for cleaning, and then he appeared. She refused to look at Sylvan. He was lurking by the hedge. He looked so angry. He grabbed my bag. I screamed and he pushed me. Liar, Sylvan breathed, soft enough that only Callista heard. He called me names, Odette continued, gaining confidence as Atticus nodded encouragingly. He said people like me owed people like him. He was speaking in this awful, aggressive slang. I was terrified. Atticus leaned over the bench, his face softening into a mask of paternal concern. You were very brave, Miss Hale. It is a tragedy that our streets are infested with such menace. Callista stood up for cross-examination. She walked toward Odette, her movements precise. Ms. Hale, Callista began, you say Sylvan was lurking, but the security camera footage from the neighbor's house, which the prosecution tried to suppress, shows Sylvan walking on the opposite side of the street, reading a book until you called out to him. Is that correct? Odette blanched. She looked at Gemma, then at the judge. I don't remember it that way, Odette stammered. And the brooch, Callista pressed. You say he grabbed your bag, but the police report states the brooch was found in his backpack, zipped inside a side pocket. If he grabbed your bag and ran, as you claimed to the officers, how did he have time to unzip his bag, transfer the item, and zip it back up while fleeing? He's a thief, Odette snapped, her mask slipping. They're good at that. Sleight of hand. Ms. Drake, Atticus interrupted, his voice like grinding stones. You are badgering the victim. The mechanics of the theft are irrelevant. The boy had the item. He was caught with the item. Do not try to confuse the jury with logistics. Logistics are the facts of the case, Your Honor, Callista argued. The fact is, Atticus boomed, pointing a finger at Sylvan, that we have a predator sitting in this chair. Look at him. He sits there with that arrogance. No remorse, no shame. It's genetic, I tell you. A cultural rot. Atticus was losing control, his bias spilling out like sewage. He turned his gaze fully on Sylvan. You thought you could intimidate a girl like Odette. You thought because you're big and urban that you could take what you want? Let me tell you something, boy. In this county, we have a way of dealing with weeds. We pull them out by the root. The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Sylvan slowly unclasped his hands. He looked at the court reporter, ensuring she was typing every word. Then he looked at Atticus. Are you finished, Atticus? Sylvan asked. The courtroom gasped. He hadn't said, Your Honor. He had used the judge's first name. The silence that followed Sylvan's question was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Atticus Ravensworth froze. His face went from red to a deathly mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his starch-stiff collar. What did you just say to me? I asked if you were finished, Sylvan repeated, his voice gaining volume, filling the room not with shouting but with resonance. You've insulted my clothes, my hair, my background, and my race. You've predetermined my guilt before the defense has even presented a case. You've violated the judicial code of conduct at least 12 times in the last hour. I was just wondering if you were done digging your grave, or if you wanted to keep going. Bailiff! Atticus screamed, spitting flying from his lips. Gag him! Restrain him! I want him in holding! I am holding you in contempt of court! I will bury you under the jail, you insolent little cur! Two bailiffs moved forward, hands on their tasers. Stand down! Callista shouted, stepping in front of Sylvan. He has a right to speak! You cannot gag a defendant for speaking the truth! I am the truth in this courtroom, Atticus roared, standing up, his robe swirling like bat wings. I am the law, and I say this boy is a menace to society. He is a thug, a gutter rat trying to act like a human being. A gutter rat? Sylvan stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded himself with a regal grace that made the orange jumpsuit look like a tuxedo. He was tall, taller than he looked sitting down, and he stared Atticus dead in the eye. Is that what you see, Atticus? You don't see the honors student? You don't see the terrifyingly high IQ? You only see the color. I see a criminal, Atticus yelled, and I will see you rot. You see what you fear, Sylvan said calmly. You fear that the world is changing and you're being left behind. You fear that your name, Ravensworth, doesn't hold the power it used to. Atticus laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. My name is this county. My name is the law. And who are you? Ashbourne? A made-up name for a foster kid with no history. You are nothing. You come from nothing, and you will go back to nothing. Sylvan smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It wasn't happy. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. Ashbourne is the name of the family that took me in when my own blood failed me, Sylvan said. But it is not the name on my birth certificate. I don't care what your name is, Atticus sneered. You are dirt. Are you sure about that? Sylvan asked. He reached into the collar of his jumpsuit. He's got a weapon! Gemma Barrett shrieked, ducking behind the prosecution table. The bailiffs drew their weapons. Hands where we can see them! Sylvan moved slowly. He pulled out a chain that had been tucked under his undershirt. Hanging from it was a heavy silver signet ring. He didn't throw it. He didn't brandish it like a weapon. He simply held it up. Do you recognize this, Atticus? Sylvan asked softly. Atticus squinted. The distance was too great. I'm not playing show and tell with a convict. Then perhaps you should look at the back of the courtroom, Sylvan said, pointing toward the heavy double doors. At that exact moment, the doors didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that shook the frame. The humidity of the courtroom was instantly pierced by a gust of cool air from the hallway, and in the doorway stood a figure that made the air in Atticus's lungs turn to ice. He was an older man, leaning on a cane with a silver wolf's head handle. He wore a bespoke three-piece suit that cost more than the courthouse itself. His hair was silver, his posture impeccable, and his face was a harder, sharper, more powerful version of Atticus's own. It was Quentin Ravenscroft, the state attorney general, the patriarch of the family. The man who controlled the political funding for the entire eastern seaboard, and, a fact known only to a few, Atticus's estranged older brother who had kept the original family name while Atticus had softened his to Ravensworth to escape the shadow. Quentin didn't look at the judge. He looked at the boy in the orange jumpsuit. I apologize for the delay, Quentin's voice boomed, deep and resonant. He walked down the center aisle, the sound of his cane striking the floor like gunshots. Traffic was murder, and it seems... He stopped at the railing, finally looking up at the bench where Atticus stood paralyzed. It seems I arrived just in time to hear my brother call my son a gutter rat. The silence that fell over the courtroom wasn't just heavy, it was absolute. It was the silence of a world ending. Atticus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Your son? Atticus whispered, the microphone picking up the tremble in his voice. Sylvan dropped the signet ring back under his shirt. He looked at the judge with cold, pitying eyes. Hello, Uncle, Sylvan said. The temperature in courtroom 3D didn't drop, but the atmosphere froze instantly. Atticus Ravensworth, a man who had spent 30 years cultivating an aura of untouchable authority, looked as if he had been struck by a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles white, staring at the man in the aisle, Quentin Ravenscroft. Quentin didn't move. He stood like a monolith in the center of the aisle, his hands resting atop the silver wolf's head of his cane. He wasn't looking at his brother. His gaze was fixed on Sylvan, a look of complex, fierce pride mixed with a deep, sorrowful apology. I asked, Sylvan said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. If you recognize the ring, it's the Ravenscroft crest, Uncle. The same one you removed from your own finger when you decided our family name was too aggressive for a local judgeship. This is... Atticus stammered, his eyes darting between the gallery, the prosecutor, and the man who was arguably the most powerful legal mind in the state. This is highly irregular. Order! I will have order. You have had order for too long, Atticus, Quentin said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. Now you will have truth. He stepped forward, moving past the bar without asking permission. The bailiffs, who had been ready to tackle Sylvan moments ago, stepped back instinctively. You didn't tackle a state attorney general. Gemma Barrett, the prosecutor, looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She scrambled to regain control of her narrative. Your Honor, I object. This is theater. Who is this man to the defendant? I am his father, Quentin said, stopping beside the defense table. He looked down at Callista Drake. And you must be Ms. Drake. I've read your motions. Excellent work on the suppression hearing. It's a shame my brother used the Constitution as a coaster. Callista, stunned, stood up. Mr. Ravenscroft, I didn't know. No one knew, Sylvan said quietly, looking at his father. That was the deal. The deal. Atticus found his voice, shrill and defensive. What kind of sick game is this? If he is your son, Quentin, why is he in a foster home? Why is he dressed like a convict? This is a mockery of my court. Your court was a mockery long before we walked into it, Quentin shot back, turning his cold eyes on his brother. Sylvan and I made a wager 3 years ago. He believed that the justice system in this county was broken, that it preyed on the poor and the marginalized. I told him he was cynical. I told him that if a man carried himself with dignity and intelligence, the system would treat him fairly. Quentin paused, looking around the room, his gaze lingering on the terrified Odette Hale. Sylvan decided to prove me wrong. He left my home, took his mother's maiden name, and entered the foster system. He wanted to see how the world would treat Sylvan Ashbourne, the foster kid, compared to Sylvan Ravenscroft, the heir. A murmur of disbelief swept through the gallery. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously on their phones. And what we found, Quentin continued, his voice hardening, was you, Atticus. We found a judge who denies bail based on zip codes. We found a prosecutor who suppresses exculpatory evidence. And we found a police force that plants evidence on honor students because they fit a profile. That is a lie, Gemma shrieked. I resent that implication. Resent it all you want, Ms. Barrett, Sylvan said, leaning back in his chair, the fear completely gone from his posture. But we have the receipts. Atticus slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a whip. Enough! I will not have my courtroom turned into a soap opera. Mr. Ravenscroft, if you are not counsel of record, you will take a seat in the gallery, or I will have you removed. And you, he pointed a trembling finger at Sylvan, your parentage does not change the facts. You were found with stolen property. The law applies to everyone, regardless of whose son they are. Does it? Sylvan asked. Then why did you assume I was guilty the moment you saw me? You said it was biological. You said it was in my nature. Does that mean the urge to steal is in the Ravenscroft blood, Uncle? Should we check your pockets? I am holding you in contempt, Atticus roared. 5 days in county jail. Bailiff, take him away. If you touch him, Quentin said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, I will have your badge, your pension, and your freedom by sunset. The bailiffs froze. They looked at the judge, then at the attorney general. The hierarchy of power was shifting in real time. I am the judge here, Atticus screamed, standing up. This is my courtroom! Then act like it, Quentin snapped. I am stepping in as co-counsel for the defense. Ms. Drake, with your permission? Callista blinked, then nodded vigorously. Granted, absolutely granted. Good, Quentin said. He placed his cane on the table and sat down next to his son. For the first time, the two of them looked like a unit. Two lions facing a pack of hyenas. Now, Atticus, we were discussing the cross-examination of Ms. Hale. I believe Ms. Drake had a question about the logistics of the theft. Atticus sank back into his chair. He was trapped. If he threw Quentin out, he looked afraid. If he let him stay, he was outmatched. "Proceed," Atticus hissed, his face pale. "But tread carefully." The dynamic of the trial had shifted so violently that the air felt charged with electricity. Odette Hale sat in the witness stand, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She had expected to cry, point a finger, and watch a boy disappear into the prison system. She had not expected to face the state attorney general. Quentin Ravenscroft didn't approach the witness stand. He stood by the defense table, reviewing a file Callista had handed him. He took his time, letting the silence stretch until Odette began to fidget, picking at the lace of her handkerchief. "Ms. Hale," Quentin said finally, not looking up from the papers. "You stated that my son, the defendant, grabbed your bag, pushed you, and took the brooch. Is that your testimony?" "Yes," Odette whispered. He was very aggressive." "Aggressive," Quentin repeated, tasting the word. He looked up. "Ms. Hale, are you aware that the penalty for perjury in a felony case is up to 5 years in prison?" "Objection!" Gemma Barrett jumped up. "Intimidation!" "I am merely informing the witness of her civic duties," Quentin said smoothly. "Now, Ms. Hale, you claimed you were taking the brooch to the jeweler for cleaning. Which jeweler?" Odette blinked. The one on Main Street, Goldfarb's." "Goldfarb's," Quentin nodded. "Interesting, because we have a subpoenaed record from Goldfarb's jewelers. They have no record of an appointment. In fact, Mr. Goldfarb is currently in Florida. The shop has been closed for renovations all week." Odette's eyes widened. She looked at her parents in the front row. Her father, a wealthy real estate developer, looked furious, but whether at Sylvan or his daughter, it was hard to tell. Maybe I made a mistake," Odette stammered. "Maybe it was the other one, in the mall." "Maybe," Quentin said. "Or maybe you weren't going to a jeweler at all. Tell me, Ms. Hale, do you know a young man named Julian Thorne?" Gemma Barrett froze. She knew that name. Julian Thorne was a known drug dealer who operated out of the prep school Odette attended. I might know him," Odette said, her voice trembling. "You might?" Quentin walked toward the jury, holding up a piece of paper. "Because we have text messages retrieved from your cloud account between you and Mr. Thorne from the morning of the incident. Would you like me to read them?" "Objection! Relevance!" Gemma shouted. "It goes to motive, Your Honor," Callista Drake chimed in, finding her footing. "If the witness had a debt to pay and no cash, a family heirloom might be a convenient solution." Atticus looked like he wanted to vomit. He knew the Hales socially. He played golf with Odette's father. But he couldn't block this, not with Quentin standing there. "Overruled," he muttered. Quentin smiled. "Thank you. In these texts, Mr. Thorne threatens to expose you if you don't pay him $2,000 by noon on Tuesday. The theft occurred at 11:45 a.m. on Tuesday. Quite a coincidence." Odette started to cry. But these weren't the pretty, practiced tears from before. These were ugly, panicked sobs. "He was going to tell everyone. He has pictures." "So you took the brooch," Quentin said, his voice relentless. "You took it to sell it. But then you saw Sylvan walking down the street. A convenient scapegoat. Someone who looked the part in your eyes. Someone Judge Ravensworth would be happy to convict without asking too many questions." "He looked at me!" Odette screamed, standing up in the witness box. "He shouldn't have been there. It's a private neighborhood. If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have had to do it." The admission hung in the air. "So you planted it," Quentin said. You staged the attack. You slipped the brooch into his bag when you bumped into him, which the security footage clearly shows you doing, and then you screamed for the police. He's nobody, Odette wailed, looking at Atticus. Judge, please. He's just a foster kid. My dad. My dad gives money to your campaign. You said you'd take care of it. Pandemonium erupted. Gemma Barrett face-palmed, sinking into her chair. Atticus looked like he had been shot. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth agape. Order! Atticus banged his gavel, but it was weak. The jury will disregard. The jury will do no such thing, Quentin roared. We have a confession of perjury, filing a false police report, and an attempt to frame an innocent minor. And we have a witness implicating the presiding judge in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. I did no such thing, Atticus yelled, his voice cracking. I am a victim of her lies as much as anyone. Are you? Sylvan spoke up. He stood next to his father. Then why did you deny my request for fingerprint testing on the brooch? Why did you deny the motion to subpoena the security footage? Why did you ignore the police officer's note that the brooch was found in a pocket that I couldn't have reached while running? Sylvan walked toward the bench. The bailiffs didn't move. You didn't care about the truth, Uncle, Sylvan said. You saw a black boy in an orange jumpsuit, and you saw a problem to be solved. You saw a commodity to be traded for political favor with the Hale family. Sit down, Atticus shrieked. I am the judge. Not for long, Quentin said. Miss Drake, do you have the motion? Callista pulled a thick document from her briefcase. Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges with prejudice. Furthermore, we are filing a formal motion for your recusal based on personal bias, conflict of interest, and familial relationship to the defendant. Atticus looked around the room. He saw the reporters recording. He saw the jury looking at him with disgust. He saw Odette sobbing into her hands. Dismissed, Atticus whispered. I can't hear you, Sylvan said. Case dismissed, Atticus screamed, slamming the gavel down one last time. Get out! All of you! Court is adjourned! He stood up and fled the bench, disappearing into his chambers, his black robe trailing behind him like the tail of a wounded rat. The chaos in the hallway was immediate. Reporters swarmed Quentin and Sylvan as they exited the courtroom, microphones thrusting like spears. Flashbulbs popped, blinding in the dim corridor. Mr. Ravenscroft, did you know your brother was biased? Sylvan, how long have you been undercover? Is the Attorney General investigating the Hale family? Quentin raised a hand and the crowd quieted. He had a presence that commanded silence. My son, Quentin said, placing a heavy hand on Sylvan's shoulder, has endured months of indignity to expose a cancer in our justice system. Today the tumor was identified. Tomorrow we begin the surgery. We will be launching a full investigation into every case presided over by Judge Atticus Ravensworth in the last 10 years. If there is rot, we will find it. Sylvan looked at the cameras. This wasn't just about me, he said, his voice steady. I had a father who could come save me. I had a lawyer, he nodded to Callista, who was beaming, who fought for me when she thought I had nothing. But there are hundreds of kids in that courtroom who didn't have a Quentin Ravenscroft. They just had an Atticus, and they're sitting in prison right now because of it. What about Odette Hale? A reporter shouted. Ms. Hale is a child who made a terrible mistake, Sylvan said. But she was enabled by adults who taught her that her comfort was more important than my life. She will face the law. Unlike in my uncle's court, however, she will get a fair trial. They pushed through the crowd and out into the blinding sunlight of the courthouse steps. The heat of the day had broken, replaced by a cool breeze. You did good, kid, Callista said, walking beside them. She looked at Quentin. I have to admit I was terrified of you for about 10 minutes in there. Quentin chuckled. Only 10? I'm losing my touch. He turned to Sylvan. Are you ready to come home? Your room is exactly as you left it. although the housekeeper may have turned it into a shrine. Sylvan looked back at the courthouse. He saw the blinds in the judge's chambers twitch. He knew Atticus was watching. "Not yet," Sylvan said. "We're not done." "Oh?" Quentin raised an eyebrow. "Atticus dismissed the case to save his own skin," Sylvan said. "He thinks if he hides, this will blow over. He thinks the Ravensworth name will protect him." "He's right, usually," Quentin admitted. "The establishment protects its own." "That's why we have to break the establishment," Sylvan said. "I don't want to just go home, Dad. I want to help Callista. I want to go through those files. Every kid he sent away, every motion he denied." Callista looked at Sylvan, surprised. "You want to intern? For a public defender? You could have any job in the state." "I don't want a job," Sylvan said. "I want a reckoning." Quentin smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown in years. "Well, it seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree after all. Very well. Callista, you're going to need resources. I'm assigning 2 of my senior investigators to your office, effective immediately, and I'll cover the costs." "And Atticus?" Callista asked. "Atticus is currently calling every favor he has," Quentin said. "He's calling the mayor, the governor, the bar association. He's trying to build a wall." "Let him build it," Sylvan said darkly. "It'll just be harder for him to get out when we set it on fire." Later that evening, inside the lavish Ravensworth estate, Atticus paced his study. The brandy in his glass was trembling. His phone had been ringing nonstop, but he hadn't answered it. He had underestimated the boy. He had underestimated Quentin. But most of all, he had underestimated the fragility of his own power. He walked to the window and looked out at his manicured lawn. He saw a car parked across the street, a black sedan. Not police, not media. It was a private car. And leaning against it was a man Atticus recognized. It was one of the foster fathers from a case 5 years ago. A man Atticus had humiliated in court when he removed a child from his care for poverty. The man was just watching. Atticus closed the blinds. His heart was hammering against his ribs. The fear he had inflicted on so many was finally, slowly, creeping into his own house. "It will blow over," he whispered to the empty room. "I am a Ravensworth. I am the law." But even as he said it, the phone rang again. This time he picked it up. "Atticus!" The voice on the other end was icy. It was the governor. "Governor," Atticus breathed, relief washing over him. "Thank God. This media circus is—" "Atticus, shut up," the governor said. "I'm watching the news. You have the Attorney General calling for a corruption probe. You have a witness claiming you took bribes from the Hale family. You are radioactive. I can explain. It was a setup. My brother—" "Your brother is a shark, and you're bleeding in the water." The governor cut him off. "I'm calling to tell you that I am accepting your resignation, effective immediately." "Resignation?" Atticus gasped. I didn't resign." "You will," the governor said. "By morning, or I will initiate impeachment proceedings myself. I'm not going down with you, Atticus. Goodbye." The line went dead. Atticus dropped the phone. It hit the expensive Persian rug with a dull thud. Resignation. It was the end of his career. But as he looked at the dark window, he realized it might be the least of his problems, because Sylvan Ashbourne wasn't just coming for his job, he was coming for his legacy. And karma, as Atticus was about to learn, didn't care about family names. The basement of the public defender's office was a stark contrast to the mahogany-paneled courtroom where Sylvan had stood trial just 48 hours prior. It was a labyrinth of metal shelves, flickering fluorescent lights, and the smell of dust and despair. Here, the lives of the poor were catalogued in cardboard boxes, stacked floor to ceiling, silent monuments to a system that had chewed them up and spit them out. Sylvan Ashbourne sat at a folding table, his sleeves rolled up, a mountain of files to his left. He wasn't wearing the orange jumpsuit anymore. He was dressed in a simple button-down and slacks, but his eyes held the same intensity that had silenced a courtroom. Beside him, Callista Drake was fueled by her fourth cup of cheap coffee, her eyes scanning a spreadsheet on her laptop. "It's a pattern," Sylvan said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. He held up a file from 3 years ago. "Case 409B, Marcus Williams, charged with possession. First offense. The sentencing guidelines suggest probation. Atticus gave him 5 years. "And here," Callista said, typing furiously, "Case 512C, Sarah Jenkins, shoplifting, single mother. Atticus set bail at $50,000. She sat in jail for 8 months awaiting trial because she couldn't pay. She lost her job, her apartment, and her kids. But look at the lawyer," Sylvan pointed to the bottom of the document. "Who represented Marcus?" Callista squinted. "A court-appointed attorney. Wait, no. He hired a private firm. Sterling and Associates. And Sarah?" Sylvan handed her the file. "Sterling and Associates," Callista read. She looked up, a chill running down her spine. "I know that firm. It's a shell. It doesn't have a physical office. It's just a P.O. box in the financial district." Sylvan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I've gone through 50 cases where the defendant received a bizarrely harsh sentence or an impossible bail. In every single one, the initial counsel, before they ran out of money and got a public defender, was connected to Sterling and Associates." "You think they're paying Atticus?" Callista asked. "I think it's worse," Sylvan said. "I think Atticus is Sterling and Associates." The door to the basement opened, and Quentin Ravenscroft descended the stairs. He looked out of place in the dingy basement, his tailored suit immaculate, but his expression was grim. He carried a leather satchel. "You're on to something," Quentin said, placing the satchel on the table. "My investigators just cracked the shell company. Sterling and Associates is registered to a holding company in the Caymans, but the dividends, they flow into a domestic trust. Let me guess," Sylvan said. "The Ravensworth Family Trust?" "Close," Quentin said darkly. "The A.R. Preservation Fund. Beneficiary, Atticus Ravensworth." Callista gasped. He was profiting from the misery he inflicted? He was forcing defendants to liquidate their assets to pay for legal defense that funneled money back to him, and then he'd throw the book at them anyway to look tough on crime. "It's the perfect ecosystem of corruption," Quentin said, pacing the small space. "He creates the fear. He offers the solution through a shadow firm. He takes the money, and then he destroys the client to silence them. It's not just bias, Sylvan. It's an industry." Sylvan stood up, grabbing the Marcus Williams file. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, hard rage. He stole years from people. He didn't just insult them. He ate their lives. "And now," Quentin said, "we're going to make him choke on it. But we need one more thing. We have the paper trail. We need the voice." "Gemma Barrett," Sylvan said. "She's been trying to call me all morning," Callista admitted. "She's terrified. She knows she's attached to him." "Bring her in," Quentin ordered. "Offer her immunity if she talks. If she doesn't, tell her she can share a cell with Atticus." The arrest of Judge Atticus Ravensworth was not a quiet affair. He had hoped for a dignified surrender, perhaps a private meeting with the governor where he could negotiate a retirement. But Sylvan and Quentin had decided that dignity was a luxury Atticus could no longer afford. It happened on a Friday morning, right in the middle of a bar association luncheon where Atticus was desperately trying to shore up support. He was standing at the podium, a glass of champagne in his hand, sweating through his suit as he ranted about political witch hunts and the sanctity of the judiciary. "They are trying to destroy me because I stand for order," Atticus shouted, his voice shrill. "Because I refuse to let the mob rule." The doors to the banquet hall burst open, but it wasn't the police. It was Sylvan. He walked in, flanked not by officers, but by the very people Atticus had wronged. Marcus Williams, fresh out of prison, looking older than his 25 years. Sarah Jenkins, clutching a photo of the children she was fighting to get back. Dozens of them. A silent army of the disenfranchised. The room fell deadly silent. The wealthy lawyers and judges stared, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their mouths. "You don't stand for order, Uncle," Sylvan said, his voice carrying across the banquet hall without a microphone. "You stand for profit." "Security!" Atticus screamed, backing away from the podium. "Remove these trespassers!" "They aren't trespassers!" a voice boomed from the back. Quentin Ravenscroft stepped forward, followed by a phalanx of state troopers and FBI agents. "They are witnesses." Quentin held up a warrant. "Atticus Ravensworth, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and 34 counts of deprivation of civil rights under color of law." "You can't do this here," Atticus sputtered, looking at his peers for help, but eyes were averting everywhere. The smell of fear coming off him was palpable. "Gemma Barrett gave us the ledger, Atticus," Quentin said, twisting the knife. "She kept a personal diary of every bribe you authorized, every piece of evidence you ordered her to bury. It's over." 2 troopers marched up the stage. They didn't treat him gently. They spun him around, pulling his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked, a sound that Atticus had heard 1,000 times from his bench, but never imagined hearing against his own skin. "I am a Ravensworth," Atticus howled as they dragged him off the stage. "I am the law. You can't touch me." Sylvan stepped into his path. The troopers paused. Atticus looked at his nephew. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, stripped of all the arrogance that had defined him. He looked small. "You," Atticus hissed. "You ungrateful little mongrel. I should have had you sent to juvenile hall the day you were born." Sylvan didn't flinch. He looked at the man who had called him a predator, a weed, a gutter rat. "You called me a criminal, Atticus," Sylvan said softly. "But look at us now. I'm the one standing free, and you're the one in the cage." He leaned in close. "Enjoy the jumpsuit. I hear orange isn't your color." The troopers hauled him away. As Atticus was dragged through the crowd, the silence broke. It started with a slow clap from Marcus Williams. Then Sarah joined in. Then the waiters. Then, slowly, even the lawyers began to applaud. It was the sound of a kingdom crumbling. 6 months later, the courthouse had been renamed. The Ravensworth Judicial Center lettering had been pried off the stone facade, leaving a ghost of the name that the rain was slowly washing away. It was now simply the County Justice Hall. Sylvan sat on a bench outside the building, watching the autumn leaves fall. He wore a college hoodie, pre-law, Columbia University. The door opened and Quentin sat down beside him. He looked tired but lighter, as if a heavy coat had been taken off his shoulders. "The jury came back," Quentin said quietly. Sylvan didn't look up. "And?" "Guilty on all counts," Quentin said. "Consecutive sentences. He'll never see the outside of a prison again. They're sending him to a maximum security facility upstate. General population." Sylvan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for half a year. "And Odette?" "Probation, community service, and mandatory counseling," Quentin said. "Her father tried to buy her way out, but the new DA wasn't having it. She has a record now. The colleges she wanted, they rescinded her acceptance." "Karma," Sylvan murmured. "Justice," Quentin corrected. He put a hand on Sylvan's knee. "You know, Callista is threatening to hire you as a paralegal while you're in school. She says you have a knack for finding things other people miss." Sylvan smiled. "I might take her up on that, but I have a question, Dad." "Ask." "When I was in that cell, when I was sitting in that chair, did you ever doubt, did you ever think, even for a second, that maybe I wouldn't be able to pull it off, that Atticus would crush me?" Quentin looked at the courthouse, then at his son. He saw the strength in Sylvan's jaw, the wisdom in his eyes that was far too old for 17. "The world is full of Atticus Ravensworths," Quentin said. "They are loud, and they are cruel, and they hold the gavels, but they are brittle, Sylvan. They break when you hit them with the truth. I never doubted you. I only doubted if the world was ready to see you." "And is it?" Sylvan asked. Quentin smiled, a genuine, proud warmth spreading across his face. "After what you did? I think the world doesn't have a choice. You forced them to look." Sylvan stood up. He picked up his backpack, the same one that had once held planted evidence, now filled with law textbooks. "Come on," Sylvan said. "Callista is waiting. We have a meeting about the Innocence Project backlog." "You never stop, do you?" Quentin laughed, standing up and leaning on his cane. "Not while there are cages," Sylvan said, "and not while I have the keys." They walked down the steps together, the old lion and the young lion, leaving the shadow of the courthouse behind them, stepping into the bright, uncompromising light of the afternoon. The story of Sylvan Ashbourne and Judge Atticus Ravensworth is a stark reminder that authority does not equal morality. Atticus believed his title and his lineage made him untouchable, blinding him to the truth that justice is not a tool for the powerful, but a shield for the powerless. In the end, it wasn't wealth or status that toppled the tyrant. It was the integrity of a boy who refused to accept the label society tried to force upon him. The truth, like a river, always finds a way to break the dam. What an incredible journey of justice served cold. Sylvan didn't just clear his name, he tore down an entire system of corruption. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, and if you believe that justice should be blind to color and class, smash that like button right now. It helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of the drama. And I want to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Do you think Atticus deserved a harsher punishment? Or was prison the ultimate karma? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always wins.